Bro, you ever do so bad on a test you want to just give up and stop trying for the rest of the semester? For a while, that was my reality. Everything was fucked. My sleep schedule, my focus, and subsequently my grades suffered. This made me feel like an absolute failure to my lineage. But it was the transition to college that made me realize that something had to change. The education I was going to get was going to cost a lot of money, and by the time I graduate, I better have an impressive resume so I don't end up homeless, begging for handouts on the street. I realized that I had to lock in. The journey from going to being unable to focus for even a small amount of time to being able to study for hours on end was a long one, but I'm going to condense it down to the three key processes that helped me the most. The first step was getting off that damn phone. Focus is the ability to say no to things that aren't contributing to your goals. I struggled to focus because I was basically microdosing dopamine throughout the day. I wasted tons of time being unable to get myself out of the doom scrolling cycle on social media. This made it so much harder to focus when studying because of the way dopamine works. Doing something stimulating will give you tons of dopamine, but the peak of this chemical excitement determines the depth of the valley. This is why it's so difficult to transition from a stimulating activity like video games to something mundane like reading or studying. To fix this issue, I basically just made my daily life a little less interesting. That sounds bad, but it's really just practicing being comfortable with being bored. I started by just not bringing my phone to the bathroom when I would take a shit. This left me alone with my thoughts, which was a little uncomfortable at first, but I got used to it. Eventually, I worked my way up to just removing the apps on my phone that were distracting me. How does all this translate into being able to focus? Well, you see, when your baseline level of dopamine returns to normal, you'll actually find studying somewhat fun because of the mental stimulation it brings you in an otherwise boring day without your vices. Imagine you're stuck in a room with an electric buzzer that'll shock you if pressed. Studies show that people will often choose to press the button and experience pain because it's better than being bored. That's the secret. When there's nothing left to do but to study, you will study because it's better than feeling bored. The second step was minimizing the amount of decisions I had to make. So much of our time and energy is sneakily taken away by the amount of small decisions that pile up throughout the day. What to eat in the morning for breakfast, what to wear. All of this took away from my ability to sit down and do the work that was important. The simple cure to this issue was time blocking my day and making sure that all of my action items were written out clearly. You can simply do this with online calendar apps like Google Calendar or Apple Calendar. I also found physical reminders written in pocket notebooks or sticky notes to be really helpful because of how quickly accessible they are. To implement this, I would create a list of things that needed to be done, including the exact actions, so that there was no room for vagueness. This makes it so that when you sit down to do the work, there's no time wasted in thinking about what needs to be done. I kind of made each day feel like the night before the first day of school, in a sense that my plan to do work was always neatly laid out. The final concept that I found really important was cybernetics. This fancy sounding word means steersman in Greek, and I understand it as the ability to course correct. Think about navigating through a map where your goal is the final destination and there are side locations and traps along the way that should be avoided. Becoming aware of these traps by reflecting on your actions will make sure that your time is well spent. As an example, I used to deceive myself into thinking that I was being productive by doing practice questions that were no longer challenging, when in reality, to effectively study for an exam, I should have been focusing on my weak areas. This false sense of productivity can take many forms, such as checking your email when you should really be making a study plan. The overall idea is to be aware of whether or not your actions are actually contributing to your goal, because what's the point of straining yourself to do focused work when you're working towards the wrong thing? Alright, now get your ass off YouTube and go lock in.